Oh yes, baby. It is storming outside, so these fools are not gonna be outside blowing all these fireworks. I'm so happy, because Lord knows I couldn't deal with that this year. I'm so over the firework nonsense. Anyway, hi y'all, welcome back to Bookishrealm. My name is Ashley, and today we are here to talk a little bit about my best and worst books of June 2022. So if y'all didn't realize, which I hope you did realize, I did not put out any recent reads for the month of June. That was very much so an intentional thing. There was a lot going on in June, like a whole lot, a lot, very positive things, but a lot. And when it was all said and done, I realized that I was not capturing any footage. I wasn't really sitting down and recording myself talking about any books. So these books, literally, honestly, you're gonna have to catch the reviews on my Goodreads, because that, like, sis did not just hit her mark this past month. Like, you are going to be getting a recent reads from me sometime this week, because I have been filming, doing reading updates and the whole nine. But the month of June was a lot. It was a whole lot, so I ain't really get that much done. But anyway, we're here to talk about my top 5 best books, and I think there actually might be 6 disappointing reads. I don't know what happened in June. June started off like really slow in terms of my reading, like really slow in terms of my reading, and then towards the end of the month, I just started picking up my reading. I also read some really heavy stuff in June, so at the end of the month, I was like, F all of you, I'm not reading anything else that's going to stress me the hell out. I am going to read what I want to read, and what I want to read is fluff and lots of graphic novels, which is what I ended up doing. So we're gonna go ahead and jump in. I will tell you all of the books that I did end up reading for the month of June and give you a little bit of stats, and then we'll jump right into the worst books first, because I think this is how I did it last time. Do the worst books first, that way we always end the video on a positive note. That is always the aim. That is the goal. Okay, so the first book that I ended up reading in June was The Princess in Black. Then I read The Sea Witch, which is the 4th book in the Wicked Villain series. I'm sorry, it is the 5th book in the Wicked Villain series. It Takes Two to Tumble, The Best We Could Do, Jukebox, Borders, Red Envelope, How Do We Relationship Volume 2, Fall Into You, Here's the Deal, a Memoir, Drag Me Up, Cinderella, Patsy, Finding Jupiter, Finding Me, Katie the Cat Sitter, The Legend of Auntie Poe, Isla to Island, Temple of the Inner Flame, The Bad Guys, Seaside Stranger, Volume 2, The Civil War of Amos Abernathy, Sasaki and Miyano, Volume 1, Jaden's Impossible Garden, Sakamoto's Swim Club, Ruby's Reunion Day Dinner, Seaside Stranger, Volume 3, and With Great Power, The Marvelous Stanley. Okay, so those are all the books that I ended up reading. As you can see, we went from like light to dark to light again. It was all over the place. Okay, now for some quick stats. I did end up reading 6,098 pages this month, which is the lowest number of pages that I have read all year, I believe. I'm pretty sure that this is the lowest amount. I think the second lowest was probably a little over 8,000 pages. Y'all, if you hear any like noises, like it is storming pretty bad here right now, so I apologize if you hear any additional noise. But yes, so this is the lowest amount of pages that I have read so far in a month this year, but I am already at my goal. Like, I'm on pace for my goal, so I have read over 55,000 pages so far this year, which is on track to reach my 100,000 page goal by the end of the year. I read 28 books, and 71% of those 28 books were written by BIPOC authors and featured BIPOC characters. 50% of the books that I read did have queer representation, which in my last video I said that I wanted to continue to make that mark of making sure that my books had in between, or my reading for the month had at least 40 to 50% queer representation. That is a goal that I had set forth for myself going forward for the rest of this year. In terms of format, 8 of the books that I read were audiobooks, 15 were physical, and 5 were digital. I read a lot of physical books this month. I think that was because a lot of it were like, they were like graphic novels and manga that I checked out from the library. So this is the first month where my physical and ebook has outpaced my audio, which is usually a little different because pretty much throughout the months they're pretty even, but this month they're not even, which is an interesting statistic. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump in and start with the worst books that I read for June. So this one is going to come as no surprise, and I'm actually not going to spend a lot of time talking about it because, once again, y'all should not be surprised by this at all. It is Here's the Deal by Kellyanne Conway. This actually was not really a surprising disappointment. I do not fundamentally agree with anything that Kellyanne Conway feels in terms of politics. I did have some points in this book that I really resonated with in terms of like her perspective of being a mother and the interaction that media had with her child. That was something that I was like, wow, I actually do agree with you about that. But if you're really truly interested in hearing like my full expansive thoughts on this book, I did do a standalone review for it, so I'll make sure I link it up in the card symbol above. But of course, it was not a great read for me, so it had to unfortunately make it on this list. The next one that I have on this list is Fall Into You, and this was, now keep in mind, I'm going to say this before I even continue, this is like the worst / most disappointing. So some of the books that are in this specific category are books that I feel like are, you know, they're solid, but they were disappointing in some ways, and so they could have been rated 3 stars, but I did place them in it because they were disappointing reads. And so I had to include Fall Into You, which is a Black love romance. It is a female romance, and I was really looking forward to it, but the writing style just did me in. The author has a very interesting way of how they use pronouns in terms of like personal pronouns. So instead of introducing a character and then just using she or her, instead of using, and I say personal, proper pronouns, instead and screw that all up. So the author uses proper pronouns excessively, meaning they use the character's name excessively instead of using she or her as a pronoun in the place of consistently saying the character's name. And so I thought it was me at first, but I went and I read reviews, and Bethany also kind of picked up on it as well. And so this just doesn't mean that it wasn't a great book or that it wasn't like a good solid contemporary romance, but it was a disappointment because I really struggled adapting to the writing style, and it made it difficult for me to really like dig into the story and really enjoy the story, because I was constantly like, okay, like I don't need to hear Ashley was not feeling good, so Ashley went and got cough medicine, and then Ashley went and got a drink, and then Ashley it's just like, okay, I know it wasn't so complex, like in terms of like the characters and the plot. It wasn't so complex that I had to be reminded of who we were talking about. It wasn't confusing. So the excessive use of the proper pronoun or the names was just like, this is a bit much, and you're taking me out of the story. So it just took me out of that level of enjoyment. It's not to say that I won't ever read anything from this author again, or that I don't think they don't have potential to grow as an author. It's not any of that. I just think that in this moment, in reading the book, it just was a disappointment because I was really looking forward to it. And fall is my favorite freaking season. I love the fall. I am not technically a fall baby. My birthday is the last day of summer, but I am a fall child at heart. I absolutely love that. This season is just amazing. I love fall. It's everything to me. And so with this being a book that centers around fall, and it is a, you know, female romance, and it's 2 Black women, it was disappointing for me to be taken out of the story in that way. The next one that I have is Finding Jupiter, and this is a YA debut. This is also another one that I think I rated 3 or 3.5 stars, but it was disappointing to me because this is one that I was really looking forward to. The cover is absolutely gorgeous. It is about two kids who are, you know, meeting, they're falling in love, and then there's this huge secret that kind of could possibly tear them apart. And I just liked the whole idea of, you know, these two black kids meeting at a roller skating ring and really getting to know each other, which they do kind of like fall into each other pretty quickly. But there were several things that kind of took me out of the story. One of them being that this story was very nostalgic for me. I am 30 and I take issue with stuff like that because a lot of what the author was writing, it felt like it was a story that was written for me as an adult reader. And I think that publishing is struggling with that right now, where YA has become a age category that is not really targeted to 12 to 18 year olds, which is what we usually look at in terms of like libraries. We say teens 12 to 18. And so it's very awkward when you have an age category that's supposed to be for 12 to 18 and then we end up getting situations where it's not for 12 to 18, it's for like 18 to 30. And so a lot of the pop culture references, the music references, all of that stuff was stuff that I grew up on, and it was confusing because I wasn't sure what time period the book was taking place in. If it was like during like my high school and middle school years, but even then I don't know how much appeal something of that nature would have to a younger audience, because that music is not music that technically has held up and is not something that every generation will connect to. Like, you know, you have some artists that connect with every generation, but a lot of the references, except outside of like Beyonce, like these were songs that I don't even think kids nowadays would really even listen to be honest. It was stuff that I listened to growing up, and it's not music that has standed like the test of time or anything like that. So it was just weird because I'm like, I think there's confusion on who the target audience is supposed to be in this book, and we say this is a teen book, but I don't think a teen audience was consistently held in mind when creating this work. And so that is a issue I think that is being exhibited as a whole within publishing. And so that to me was kind of like that threw me off. Also, I think that in the way that this book was written, the big surprise that ends up tearing our two main characters apart, it wasn't really a surprise because of the way that things were written. It was easy to tell what exactly had happened before it happened. And it was because of the way that side characters were written, particularly the way that the parents were written. You could put the pieces of the puzzle together and figure out what was going to be this big hurdle that our two characters were going to have to kind of overcome by the time we get to the end of the book. And so that was a disappointment for me because I was like, there was no element of surprise. I knew what we were dealing with. I kind of knew what we were going to be walking into, and it was just frustrating. I think that it did have potential where we are looking at some great writing in terms of characters that are both experiencing grief. I think that the two main characters did end up having a really great relationship in which they both had like trust issues, and they were able to really kind of find trust and dependence within each other, and not codependence, but just a safety net within each other that they weren't necessarily getting with the outside world. I also like the fact that we had some, sex positive aspects in this book. I do like that teen books are becoming more sex positive, and this one definitely was a sex positive book. And it was an interesting kind of flip because I know stereotypically in the past when it comes to YA books and we're looking at a heterosexual relationship with cis boy, cis girl, they usually have the cis boy who is the one that is, I don't want to say pushing for sex, but is more upfront about sex than our girl who's the main character. But in this one it was reversed, and so we had a young black girl who was very secure in herself and her sexuality and was okay with having sex. It was her decision. And we had a young black boy who was like, I want to wait, I want to get to know you better. And so I think that took away the gendered stereotypes that we typically get with boys always being the ones that want to push for sex, when there are boys out there that are like, I want to wait, I want to get to know the person, I want my first time to be special with this person, or like, it doesn't even have to be your first time, it's just like, I want there to be more of a secure relationship before I have sex with you. Like, I think placing a label that all boys are just sex like, it leaves out those boys that are not like that. And so I was excited to see the author kind of like switch that up, and she gave our main character, our teenage girl, agency over her own body. Like, I am ready to have sex, I have had sex, I am comfortable having sex, and there's nothing wrong with that. So it was definitely a switch up that I did end up enjoying. But man, also, before I forget this, and you're probably like, actually, there's a lot of positive. It is a positive book, but it was a couple of takeaways, and I do want to note that there were positive aspects about it. There was sensory processing disorder, SPD representation on page, which I did enjoy, and I've never seen that representation in a black male character in a YA book. So I love that. I love that we did get some conversation about SPD and what it was like for him having SPD, and explaining that to her, what his experience was like growing up and how he copes with it as a young adult. So yeah, it wasn't a horrible book, but it was disappointing because I was going into this thinking like, oh, this is going to be like a 4 or 5 star read, and it was not, unfortunately. The next one that I have on this list, I actually have 6. Yeah, I have 6 disappointing reads. How unfortunate. It's Jukebox, and this is so sad because I have read the author's other work, which was Pashmina, and I enjoyed it. And so I was going into Jukebox thinking like, okay, this is going to be interesting, I'm going to enjoy it, which it was interesting. It's about a young girl whose father is really into collecting records and music, and she has trouble bonding with him sometimes because it seems like music is his only love and passion and focus, and so he does not spend as much time focusing on his wife and his daughter, and she has trouble dealing with that. And then all of a sudden her father ends up disappearing, and we find out that it's this connection to a jukebox that he was kind of looking at, and the jukebox actually ends up letting our main character and her cousin, I think it's her cousin, it's either her cousin or a family friend, one of the two. It allows them to travel through time, and so we go through different parts of history, and there's music that is aligned with each section in history, and so that was really fun, but nothing is really explained. Like, we don't really know anything. You find out why this jukebox has like these powers, but then again, not really. It isn't really fully fleshed out. It was not a well executed book, and so while it had this great potential, it doesn't follow through. So you don't understand why it only picked these select times in history completely. There are kind of like blurry reasons as to why it comes full circle, but none of it really makes sense when you get to the end of the book. And so there wasn't enough final development in the end. Like, this graphic novel could have afforded to be at least 50 to 100 pages longer, and it wasn't. It wrapped up so quickly that I think as a reader you're kind of like, okay, so I kind of understand how this whole thing works, but at the same time I don't really get how it works. And then the guy who has a connection to the jukebox, like, his whole demeanor and character is really negative, and then like within a couple of panels it switches to positive. It was like it felt very rushed and not put together at the end. And so what I was thinking was like getting like a build up to this great graphic novel and this, you know, well, ending of this great graphic novel, it didn't deliver. And I was so pissed because I like literally, when you go through each section of the book, they talk about a specific artist and this specific song related to the artist. And so I had created a whole fucking playlist on my phone, and I was listening to the music as I was reading it, and I was vibing. And then I get to the end and I'm like, what the hell is this? I was so mad because I literally was sitting in my chair and I was like, oh yeah, I'm vibing, like the music is good, I'm interested in these choices, but I want to know, like, what is this mystery? How does this mystery get solved? And like how everything comes full circle. And man, did it fall flat. So unfortunately, that was a huge miss and a huge disappointment for me. I lied, y'all. I said I had 6. I put one of the books on here twice, so okay, that makes me feel a lot better. I was like, goodness gracious, I have 6 books on my most disappointing, but it was only 5. It's still 5 and 5. That's good. 5 and 5, but I just had one book twice. All right, and the last one that I have on this list is The Sea Witch by Katie Robert, which is the 5th book in the Wicked Villain series. This is my least favorite one in the series, y'all. I have one more book to read before I finish this one, and then I start what is kind of low-key like the spin-off, which is Savine Valley series, one of those two, until I start that series. But I kind of took a break after reading this 5th one because this 5th one was like a huge disappointment. I have rated all of them, I think, anywhere between 3 to 4 stars. I think the 3rd book, was it the 4th book? I think the 4th book was my favorite and I gave it 4 stars. This one was my least favorite. I gave it 2.5 stars and I rounded up to 3 on Goodreads. It is a throuple. It is a MFF relationship between Sea Witch, who is supposed to be a play on Ursula, of course, what would end up being, I'm guessing, the Little Mermaid, and the guy that I guess in some ways would be Eric. I don't know. I stopped trying to figure everything out. This book took me forever to finish. These are not long books. They're like 200 plus pages, and so typically I can finish them in a day or 2. And I've been listening to them on audio while I've been working, probably, which is not the best decision because the steamy scenes in these are always flawless. They're great. They're always like, oh, they're hot. They're very hot. But one thing that I've noticed is that character development, and someone else has said this to me in the comments, and I appreciate you for really affirming me, like, Katie Roberts' strongest point is not the character development in all of these works, and I've noticed that, and it doesn't make her a bad writer, but I think she's really good at writing a good steamy romance and likable characters, but the actual like development and the full 360 picture of them is not her strongest suit, because in this one it was weird that we got Ursa, who is supposed to be this hard ass and really has a strong reputation, all of a sudden goes like insta-lovey mushy in a matter of a couple of days. It wasn't consistent with the character that we were getting in the beginning part of the book. And then the connection between the 3 of them in this one was not good at all. Like I just didn't really like them together as a threesome, and so it just didn't feel real. I think most of the other connections that we've gotten in the previous books, they felt somewhat realistic and I was able to buy into them, but in this one I just couldn't. It was all so insta-lovey to me, and it was disappointing because I was happy to finally get a book where we were getting a black lead that was curvy, very, just very powerful, badass, and it was like it just didn't deliver. Also, there was a conflict at the end with Zuri's father, and so it was weird that it was all this tension building up between Ursa and Zuri's father, and literally Zuri solves it in a matter of paragraphs. It was just weird because it was like, well, what was the purpose of all this tension and all this buildup if we were going to wrap it up that quickly? I hate that. Like, that is a pet peeve of mine. And when I did like my things that I hate in books, like that should have been on the list. I hate when we have this huge buildup only for the resolution to come like that. And I'm like, but why? Why did you have me in suspense for 85-90% of the book only to drop the ball in the last 10% because you could not follow through? So that definitely, it just didn't deliver. Definitely one of my least favorite in the series so far. Like I said, I will be finishing. I have to just get to that last book, and then I will be transitioning over to her other series. Okay, so let's finish this off with the 5 best books that I ended up reading this month. The first one being The Best We Could Do. I'm not going to stay talking about this one for too long because I've gushed about this book a lot. Bree and I did a live show for this one. I will make sure that I link it up in the card symbol above for you to check out if you're interested in watching the playback. Know that only like the first hour and a half is about the book. The rest of the live show was just us being us, what we do best. And so if you're just interested in hearing about the book, I would keep that in mind when watching that particular live show. But it is a nonfiction graphic memoir about a woman who is telling her life story through also the experiences of her parents. And it is interesting because everything comes full circle, because it starts off with her having her first child and now going back and understanding all of the things that her family has gone through in terms of like their trauma and how their trauma had impacted how they raised her, and how she's very fearful of passing on her own trauma to her child. And so I ultra like connected to that as a parent who was raised by a parent who went through a lot of trauma and then passed that trauma to me. And I'm trying so freaking hard not to pass that trauma onto my child. And it is an active thing that I work through every single day. And it's difficult. It's very, very hard, because you've been conditioned to look at certain behaviors as acceptable, and certain things that you've been told and certain things that have been done to you and said to you when you were a child. And so you try not to reflect that. I did not expect to have that much of a personal connection with this one, but I really did. It made me cry like a baby. Cried and cried and cried and cried and cried. And I loved it. And I ended up giving that one 5 stars. The other one that I have on this list, which was another 5-star read. A lot of these, 3 of these are 5-star reads, and then the other 2 are 4-star reads. The other one that I have on this list is Finding Me by Viola Davis. It took me so long to get to this one because I had to wait that long to get a copy from a library, because everybody wanted to listen to this book, and I can definitely understand why. This is the epitome of not knowing what someone is going through. Like, you can't tell what they're going through just by looking at them. And so I adored every second of this book. It really just captures the beautiful spirit and soul that Viola Davis has. It really showcases all of the things that she has been through and how much she has learned from it and how much she has overcome and surpassed it. I love that we got some really great insights to her experience in the industry and the racism and colorism and pretty privilege that exists in Hollywood, which it's not surprising to hear it, but it still is it's gut-wrenching to hear how such an amazing actress has had to go through hoops in order to make it to where she is right now. And she's just a testament of perseverance. And I mean, I don't fangirl over a lot of actors and actresses. It's just never been me. And so when I really connect to an actor and actress, like, I really adore them, and Viola Davis is one of those for me. And you know, she definitely talks about her own imperfections, and I always respect someone who can be bold enough and strong enough to say, like, this is what I've been through, but I also am not a perfect person, and I won't paint myself as such. And so we just learn a lot about her. And it's a tough book to read. It's a tough book to listen to when she describes like the poverty and the abuse, especially the abuse of her mother at the hands of her father, and still having to navigate a relationship with him, and the sexual abuse that was happening to people in her family, and just the difficulties that she had, not only in the industry, but even just getting her toe in the door, like how difficult that was. And even like some interesting tidbits about like the comparisons that people make with like theater people and, you know, like Hollywood movie and TV people. And so if you, like, seriously, if you have not had the opportunity to read this memoir, it's one of the best that I have read, so I do recommend it. The third one on this list that I have is Drag Me Up. This is another one that I'm not going to talk too much about because we did end up doing a live show for this, for the Queer Romance Readathon. This was the group pick, and we just spend so much time gushing over this book. I adored it. It was my first Art and Virtues book, and I promise you it will not be my last. I can't believe I waited this long to read him. Like, I'm ashamed to say that because I enjoy RM as a person, and I, you know, see a lot of the great things that they discuss on Twitter. I just had never picked up a book, and so it was a great opportunity for me to read this book. It is a Hades and Persephone retelling, with Persephone being a trans black woman and Hades being a demisexual black man. And so we get a lot of great elements in this. This is the Hades and Persephone retelling that I did not know that I needed. It is the best one that I have ever consumed, to be honest with you. I've read a handful of them, and this one just really did it for me. It really showcases how awful Zeus is, and I appreciated the reality in that, because Zeus is not a good person, and I can't stand when Zeus gets painted as this great, you know, person in Greek mythology when he really was an awful person. And so I'm glad that we got to see that. And the bond and the relationship between Hades and Persephone was A1. Not just the sexual chemistry that they had, because let's be honest, the sexual chemistry was off the charts. The sex scenes in this were great. They were they were amazing, but the emotional chemistry just gave it so much more. And it was a perfect balance of romance and eroticism, and I could not believe that this was RM's first book, because I'm always blown away by the skill set that some authors have with their first book in the game. It's like, it's amazing talent. And so I was so blown away by how beautiful the book was, the writing, the representation, the care that was given to both Persephone and Hades, and particularly Persephone's being a trans woman. And so the care that went into her character, like, you could feel it on each page, and it was just so, it was so great, y'all. It was so great. Loved it. If you have not read it, I don't know what you're doing with your life, but I need you to pick it up. All right, the fourth one that I have on this list is Bad Guys. Okay, so this is a children's chapter book series. I've been reading a handful of children's chapter book series. I've been accumulating some on my hold list at the library, because I've been using them not only just for my own personal, like, reader's advisory at work and for recommendations, but I just want to read what the kids are reading. Like, you know, like, what are the kids into? Like, what makes a children's story really appealing to kids? And so I've been picking up a lot of series that I know, like, circulate very well and have a lot of popularity, not only at the library, but even outside the library. And The Bad Guys, of course, is one of those series. It just got a movie adaptation, and I see why kids love it. It is not quite a graphic novel, but it has that sequential art feel to it. It's not completely there, but it's almost there. And it literally is about a wolf who decides to pair up, or to group with, not pair, there's more than them. He decides to get a group that contains him, a shark, a piranha, and a snake. And they all have horrible profiles. They're bad guys. They're not great. They all have horrible reputations, but they're tired of being bad guys, so they want to do good. And it is hilarious, because you can't be them and, like, show up to a scene and be like, all right, I'm here to save the day, because everybody's looking at you like you're a freaking wolf. Like, you can't can't save me. Like, I don't want you to save me. And so there's this particular scene in which, like, I really want to put the image up here. There is a particular scene where there's this cat that is stuck in a tree, and the four of them go to save the cat. Of course, the cat is looking like, when they're like, you know, come on down, we're here to save you, come on down. The cat's like, do I look crazy to you? There's no way in hell I'm coming down off this tree. Not with the four of y'all standing at the bottom of the tree. So it was just funny, and I was very surprised because I was like, I'm literally laughing out loud while reading this book. It was great. Like, I literally was just laughing and it was, I loved it. It was, so if you haven't been to The Bad Guys, it's like I think now it's anywhere between I think 10 to 12 books right now. So they're really easy reads, y'all. They're probably like in between 60 to 90 pages a piece, but they take like 30 minutes to read. So if you're interested in checking out some children's lit, that's definitely one that I recommend checking out. And the last one that I have on my list is Borders. And oh, this is not what I was expecting. Okay, so the story focuses on a young boy and a mother who attempt to cross from Canada into United States because the young boy's sister has moved to the United States, and so they're trying to go to visit her. And when they try to cross, border patrol, you know, asks like, what's your nationality? And the mother answers Blackfoot. And so they're like, okay, but are you American or Canadian? And she says, I'm Blackfoot. And they keep asking, are you Canadian or American? And she keeps answering, I'm Blackfoot. And so basically what you're seeing here is that there is this lack of recognition of identity that exists outside of lines that have been created by colonialism. And so there is no, I identify as Canadian or American. I'm Blackfoot because the territory in which you live in, which is my land, existed before colonizers came to draw borders and draw lines that now exist as territories. And so what's beautiful about this is that Thomas King does not tell you what's going on. He does not spell it out for you. It's one of those, he leads you to the water, but you have to drink to get the knowledge yourself. And he's not going to put the cup to your mouth. You have to figure out the rest. And I appreciate that, because a lot of the discussions that we're having with publishing right now is that a lot of these books end up holding people's hands and teaching them. And it's written so that you don't have to do any of the back end work, because it's right there. It's in your face. It's accessible. And that's someone teaching you, where Thomas King took this story and he said, here's what this story is. I want you to figure out the rest of it, fill in the pieces, and understand what is wrong with this whole situation, because I'm not going to tell you what's wrong with the situation. I want you to figure out why this situation is wrong and why these border patrol individuals should be required to have more extensive training, and how offensive it is to continue to ask, are you American and are you Canadian? And so it was beautifully done, because even me as a reader who can be well versed in a lot of things, I am well versed in a lot of things, I went and started reading articles about all of this information, because I didn't have the knowledge. And I'm like, I got what was going on, but I wanted to know historically had people run into this issue, and why was this a thing that was happening? And why was she responding in this way? What was the history behind it? And so, you know, even someone who reads a lot, who hears a lot and watches a lot, like, even I was like, okay, well, he's challenging me right now. Like, this book is a middle grade graphic novel, but he challenges the heck out of whoever reads it. And so I think that this is one of those books that should be required reading in classes, because it is a tidbit of history and information that a lot of, especially in America, I can't speak for Canada because I'm not Canadian. I don't know Canadian school systems. I know US school systems though, and I can tell you, we don't get taught this stuff in school. So this is something that I'm like, this should be required reading. This is the stuff that kids should have access to, because it gives you a different lens of history through the voices of those that have been marginalized, and it does away with the often whitewashed, colonized version of history that we are taught in our textbooks. And so it's stuff like this that I think is truly valuable to generations that are going to be coming after me. It was just really, really great. And I think I said I gave this one in the previous one 4 stars, but I ended up giving this one 4.5 stars. And so I just was amazed by it, to be honest with you. It really was a great read. If you have not read Borders, I highly recommend checking it out whenever you do get a chance. All right, y'all, so that is it. Those are my worst and best books of June 2022. Keep in mind the recent reads are going to be coming back this week. There will be a video going up sometime this week. I'm actually going to film a clip after this one doing a quick update, and so you will have more thorough reviews of everything that I've read in July, as opposed to not having a detailed video review for everything. Like I said before, if you're really interested in knowing anything, like my in-depth thoughts about anything that I did read in June, the reviews are accessible on Goodreads. I do write full-length reviews for, I would say, about 90% of the things I read. If I get behind on reviews, like there was some stuff that I had read in March I hadn't written a review for, like I'm like, all right, this review's not gonna happen, I'm just gonna give it a star rating. But usually I write a full-length review for everything. So if you want to know more about the other books that I did not talk about, that did not make it into either one of these categories, go to my Goodreads. It's linked down in the description box below. As always, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more content from me, click the subscribe button and hit the bell for notifications so you never miss another video. And in the comments below, let me know what were some of your best and worst books that you ended up reading in June, and I'll be back with another video soon.